Today I'm sewing and sharing another great pattern from Matchy Sewing Club. This is the Skipper Top and Dress pattern. This pattern offers a few different views with different length options. You also have the option of a straight or gathered front center panel seam. I've chosen the length for view A today and the gathered center panel seam of views B and C. I had some happy mail arrive yesterday, my garment labels from Kylie and the machine. I was really eager to use one of those labels in this garment today. They have a large variety to choose from on their website, and if you can't decide just which label you like the best, they also offer a mixed label set. I've left the links for these labels and the skipper top below so you can check out all the details and sew along with me. So grab that pattern, mark your dots and notches, and let's get started. We're going to start by gathering the top edge of our front center panel. Using the longest stitch on your machine, sew from one top edge to the other with about a 3/8 inch seam allowance, making sure to leave thread tails on both sides so that you have threads to pull for gathering. Now we're going to take the top edge of that gathered panel and place it right sides together with the bottom edge of the front yoke. Match your centers and pin in place. Now start pulling your gathering stitches so that the panel fits the bottom yoke from the side edge to the center. Once it fits and the gathers are distributed evenly, go ahead and pin in place. And do the same thing on the other side of the center. Now we can take this back to the machine and sew our panel to the yoke with a 1/2 inch seam allowance all the way across. Once you've sewn that seam, finish the raw edges either with your serger or a zigzag stitch. Repeat the exact same steps to attach your back panel to your back yoke, starting by gathering the top of the back panel and then placing it right sides together with the bottom edge of your back yoke, and then sew them together with a 1/2 inch seam allowance and finish your seams. For both the front and back panels, press your seams up toward the yokes. Now for both of the front and back side panels, using your serger or your zigzag stitch, we're going to finish the outer long edges. Do this for both of your front panels and repeat for both of your back panels. Now we're going to attach our side panels to our center panels. Match the raw longer edge of your side panel with the side of your center panel and pin in place. Do this on both sides with both side panels. Sew both of your seams with a 1/2 inch seam allowance and finish your seams in your preferred method. And then press the seams on both sides toward the center panel. Repeat all of these steps to attach your remaining side panels to your remaining center panel. Place your front and back bodices right sides together and pin your shoulder seams. Sew your shoulder seams with a 1/2 inch seam allowance and finish your seams. Along the edges of your front and back side panels, you have dots indicating the placement of our sleeves. Here are my front and back bodice pieces opened out along the shoulder seam, and I've marked those sleeve dots here with pins. We're going to take our bodices to our ironing board and press up these edges of our sleeve, starting from 2 inches below the dots on either side, pressing it to the wrong side by a 1/4 inch, and then again by an additional 1/4 inch. And do this along both of the side edges. Now place your front and back bodice pieces right sides together. We're going to pin the side seams starting from the notch marked from your pattern piece all the way to the bottom hem. And do this on both sides. Sew both of these side seams from the notch to the bottom of the garment with a 5/8 inch seam allowance. Backstitch at the beginning of your stitching to reinforce the armhole area. Once you have that sewn, press your seams open, and do this for both side seams. Here is my garment wrong side out with my armhole and one of my side seams in the center. We're going to use those pre-pressed creases in our armhole to create our armhole hem. Along those pre-pressed lines, we're going to fold the material a 1/4 inch to the wrong side and a 1/4 inch again, and then pin in place all the way around. Now that we have those creases pinned, we're ready to sew this armhole. We're going to start by sewing horizontally along that opening point from the pressed edge of the seam to the pressed edge of the seam, back and forth a few times to reinforce. Then we're going to pivot our stitching to edge stitch close to the armhole hem all the way around. Repeat all of these steps for your opposite armhole. Now take your neck binding to your ironing board and fold both of the long raw edges to the wrong side by 1/2 inch. And once that's pressed, go ahead and unfold your bias tape. Press back one of the short edges of your binding to the wrong side by about 1/2 inch. Place that folded edge of the bias tape at your center back and pin in place, matching up your raw edges. Continue pinning that raw edge of the bias tape to the neckline all the way around until you're back at this point. Now that your binding is back where you started, allow that loose end of the binding to overlap the folded edge by about 1/2 inch. Trim off any excess binding beyond that. Now we're going to sew our binding all around the neckline with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Once your binding is sewn to the neckline, we're going to understitch. Press your binding up and on top of the seam allowance. Then we're going to stitch the binding to the seam allowance that's underneath 1/8 inch away from the original stitching line all the way around. And now that we've understitched, we're going to trim our seam allowance down to 1/4 inch. Trim your seam allowance slowly and carefully so that you don't accidentally cut into your binding. Now I'm going to fold my bias tape to the inside of the garment along my main stitching line, and I'm going to give it a good press all the way around. Now that my bias tape is pressed to the inside, I'm going to turn my garment inside out. I'm going to fold the raw edge of the bias tape to the wrong side along that first crease line that we created with our iron earlier. Fold it once again on our pressed neckline and pin in place all the way around. Once you have your neckline bias tape pinned and ready to sew, now is a good time to add a label at the center back. I'm going to take one of my labels and tuck it under the bias tape right at the center back and pin in place. And now we can take this to our sewing machine and edge stitch close to this inner folded edge all around the neckline. And now the very last step is to hem the bottom of our shirt. For views A and B, the pattern includes a 2.5 inch hem. Take your shirt to your ironing board, press up the hem by 2.5 inches, and additionally press that raw edge to the wrong side by 1/2 inch, and do this all the way around. You can customize the width of that hem. I'm just going to do a narrow hem here, folding it up 1/4 inch, and then 1/4 inch again. I'm going to edge stitch close to this inner fold all the way around. Now give your shirt a really good press and you're all done. Thank you for watching this sew along. Make sure you check out my other videos for more great sewing inspiration, and I'll see you in the next video.